It's officially conference preview season. Haven't made it through the offseason quite just yet, but the eve of October here, September the 30th, coming to you, bringing you our first conference preview on the CB Central podcast. And we do so with a very special guest on the show, a guy I'm sure anyone who listens to this podcast is very familiar with from his outstanding work on Twitter, Tony Patelis, host of the College Hoop News podcast. Find him on Twitter at College Hoop News. Does a lot of good stuff throughout the season, covering all levels of college basketball. So definitely give him a follow if somehow you've missed that. And Tony, thanks for being with us today. I know you're the busiest man in podcasting, having just recorded an ACC podcast earlier today.
I appreciate you having me on, guys. I'm looking forward to talking some Big 12 hoops.
Yeah, and Brad, I mean, I'm certainly glad to be back. Demoralized by a Northwestern football performance that was not pleasing to yesterday. So very glad to be talking some basketball. And while we won't talk on the Big 10 today, we will be doing the Big 12 and a league I'm very excited about to watch this season. So Brad, let's start with you. We're going to start with Kansas and run through every single one of these teams and then give you our standings projection. Kansas coming off a season when they went 31-8. They bring in those three transfers and the Lawson brothers and Charlie Moore, as well as an elite recruiting class headlined by Quentin Grimes, Devin Dotson. What more is there to say with this Kansas team? Because I think the biggest burning question for me is, are they the number one team in the country?
So in terms of are they number one or not, I think not. I think that they're a perfectly reasonable team to have number one. Most people have them number one. I think 14 out of the 24 top 25s I found have Kansas in that top spot. But for me, I'm just not a huge Quentin Grimes guy, and that kind of what separates, I think, the people who have Kansas number one versus people who have another team is kind of your thoughts on Quentin Grimes. He's projected to be like a top 10 NBA draft pick from a lot of like very reputable people. But just, whenever I watched him in that U18 tournament, he can score, but he's not an elite athlete. He's not a great shooter. He's a solid all-around combo guard. Seems to be a little bit like Malik Newman, who obviously was a high-profile recruit in his own right, who didn't exactly pan out as expected. So I still have Kansas as a top 4 team in the country, obviously number 4 there. But I think that's kind of what differentiates people's opinions on Kansas is their thoughts on Quentin Grimes.
And Tony, I mean, the other guy that will draw the headlines with this Kansas team is Dedrick Lawson. And obviously, coming off the season he had at Memphis 2 years ago, a lot of people expected he might declare for the draft. Instead, he transfers, sits out the year. He's had some problems off the court, but on the court, he's as special as they come. 17.5 points per game, or 19.2, at Memphis last season of eligibility. 9.9 rebounds, 3.3 assists. Just the versatility that he brings to this club, I think, is really impressive because it allows him. He could play a small ball 5 even, where they take Udoka off the floor, and then they could play like a Quentin Grimes at the 3, LaGerald Vick at the 4. They could play KJ Lawson at the 4. Bring those 2 point guards in with Charlie Moore and Devin Dotson. Like, there's just so much flexibility that Lawson gives this Kansas team. What are you most excited about to see with Dedrick Lawson this season?
Well, first of all, you kind of said it there, Kevin. I mean, outside of Gonzaga, I think Kansas is the most complete team in the country. And I think the huge difference between this year's club and last year's club is going to be that depth in the front court. Not only do you have guys like Azubuike, D'Souza, now, like you said, you added Dedrick Lawson, a KJ Lawson, and they just bring so much versatility. Lawson can stretch the floor, which Kansas couldn't really do last year. And then you have so much depth up there. Mitch Lightfoot is another kid who can give them solid minutes off the bench. So I really think that's the difference in this year's team and last year's team is so much depth up front, so many different options. You can do Bill Self can do so many different things. So I think that's what's the difference between this year's team and last year's team.
Yeah, it really is exciting to watch. I mean, personally, I think they'll go with a starting lineup of Devon Dotson at the 1, then they'll play Quentin Grimes at the 2. Then I think they'll actually play Marcus Garrett next to Grimes as that glue guy type. And then they can bring more off the bench as like a scoring guard. LaGerald Vick off the bench is like a 3-and-D guy. Dedrick Lawson at the 4, and then they'll start Udoka Azubuike obviously at the 5, and then one of D'Souza, McCormick, and Lightfoot winds up getting significant rotation minutes at that behind Azubuike, given he only plays about 25 minutes a game. If last year and the year before were any indication, I don't think Azubuike is a guy who you want to be running out there for 30 plus minutes a night. You want him fresh and energized when he's on the floor.
Yeah, I think the whole thing with that kind of big physical interior score archetype is that they usually can't play a ton of minutes. I'm not sure. I can't really remember off the top of my head whether Azubuike is very foul prone or not, but that archetype usually picks up a lot of fouls. So it is important to have guys who are capable behind him, and they have Silvio De Sousa came on strong toward the end of last year. Mitch Lightfoot was that guy last year, and now he could be completely out of the rotation this year. So that just kind of shows what kind of depth, as Tony talked about earlier, that this front court has. And then in terms of my starting lineup, mine's a little different than yours. I have them going with Charlie Moore to start the season. People kind of forget, he was at Cal, and that Cal program has kind of fallen off a cliff in recent years. But the year he was there, they were a solid team. They were NIT, I believe. They had Ivan Rabb. That was Rabb's second and last year at Cal, and Moore averaged double figures on a solid team. It's not like he was putting up empty numbers on a bad team. And then I have them starting LeGerald Vick at that 3 spot next to Moore and Grimes in the backcourt, with obviously the Lawson Azubuike front court with Dodson, Garrett, KJ Lawson, and then for that last big man, I think I'm going with Silvio De Sousa to take the 9th spot in the rotation over McCormick and Lightfoot.
Yeah, and Tony, any thoughts on how you see kind of the rotation shaking out? I think the concern I have is just kind of the balance of you have so much size, but do you sacrifice the spacing that going small can provide? I think in this day and age, going small is the better way, but Kansas has the bodies to really go big.
They can do just so many different things, and I think it's going to take a while for Bill Self to figure out what's best for this club. So I think you're not going to see, a set rotation or whatever for quite a while. And there's just so many bodies. I can't. I was looking over when I was doing some research. I just can't believe how deep they are, and at every position, it's almost. I'm kind of curious to see what type of shooting team they are this year, because they lose Graham, CV Mihalik, Malik Newman. All those guys could really shoot. You guys are a lot more familiar with these newcomers than I am. So can these guys like Grimes and Dotson, are these like elite level shooters or no?
So Grimes is like a below average shooter, and then Dodson I think is an excellent shooter. And then Charlie Moore should be a very good shooter as well.
Okay, so they should be okay in that category then.
Yeah, and I think me and Brad touched on this when we were talking about Kentucky. Was like the margin of error when you're dealing with like a Kentucky or a Kansas with the talent they have is so much greater than these bubble teams, where like a couple of pieces could can kind of change whether you're making the NIT to being an NCAA tournament team with some of these bubble teams, depending on how a couple of things shake out. Whereas with Kansas, it's like, oh well, if their shooting isn't great, maybe they're only a top 15 team this year. Like that's like the floor. Where like, you feel pretty confident that a roster with the amount of talent that this team has, with a great coach, with experience. I mean, with these transfers, I mean, Dedrick Lawson played a lot of basketball. KJ Lawson played a lot of basketball and averaged 12 and 8 in a really good league. Charlie Moore's played a lot as a freshman. Quentin Grimes and Devin Dotson are two of the most experienced newcomers in all of college basketball in terms of they've played with USA Basketball. They play like veterans from the tape I've seen. They're very game ready, and so from that perspective, I just think this team has what it takes to win a national title. I don't think I'm going to slot them in at 1 to begin the season. I still may circle back to that, as I think I'm probably going to go with Gonzaga early.
And then in regards to Dedrick Lawson as well, and just how talented and how good he is. After his sophomore year at Memphis, he could have gone pro. I mean, he would have been probably a second-round pick, maybe even a first-round pick. But I think he would have been almost a lock to be picked in the second round. He could have left after sitting out this past season and probably would have been a second-round pick as well. I actually thought when he committed as a transfer to Kansas that he was going to end up doing that and pull. I think the Chris Obekwa was he had transferred to a UNLV, but then went pro after his sit-out year. I believe that's kind of the most recent example of that. But now they have a guy who could have been in the NBA 2 years ago for his senior season or his redshirt junior season, that's just such an advantage.
Absolutely. He's a pretty good shot blocker, too. And like I said, he can step out and shoot the three a little bit as well. So he just brings so much versatility. I really like his game a lot.
Anything else on Kansas?
They're loaded.
So Tony, you said that you have them number one nationally?
No. I have Gonzaga number one nationally, and I have Kansas number two. I think you could flip-flop them. Like I said, they're the two most complete teams in my eyes in the country when it comes to, positioning and everything.
And then Kevin, where did you have them?
I think I'm going to have them at 3 behind Gonzaga and Kentucky, but the margins are just so tight up there. I mean, if you told me I could put Kansas number 1 and not really think twice about it.
And I have them at number 4, but they might get moved up to number 3. I have them behind Kentucky, Duke, and then currently Auburn, but I'm kind of rethinking my Auburn love from earlier in the season.
Yes, Brad is the biggest Auburn fan that is not a fan of Auburn basketball that you'll find. He is huge on this team. But if you missed this segment, breaking news, Kansas is going to be very, very good this year. And let's move on to a few of the other teams we want to touch on. We're going to go through every single team by last year's standings, then we'll give our this year's projected standings. So tied in second last year were Texas Tech and West Virginia. We'll go alphabetically, and we'll go with Texas Tech. And this was a team that under Chris Beard really blossomed in year 2. Keenan Evans was one of the best guards in the country. A pair of underrated freshmen, Zaire Smith and Jarrett Culver, gave them awesome minutes. Now Beard lost Zaire Smith to the pro ranks much earlier than he might have expected, which is always difficult for a coach. Me and Brad have talked about that on the pod all the time, is how difficult it is to recover from those early entries that you never expect. But they do bring in a really good recruiting class, headlined by a 4.5-star big combo forward, Kevon Moore. Then they also grabbed 2 outstanding grad transfers in Tariq Owens from St. John's, who will block some shots for them, and Matt Mooney, who can really score the ball coming in from South Dakota. So Texas Tech reloading, but still feels like they'll have to take a step back with all the talent they lose between Evans, Smith, Naeem Stevenson, Tommy Hamilton, Justin Gray, like Zach Smith. It was just such a deep group of seniors that all graduated, and then Smith, the crown jewel.
Yeah, so basically my kind of biggest concern right now with the Texas Tech has to do with all this roster turnover, where I think that they did a pretty solid job of plugging the holes. Matt Mooney was probably a top 3 or 4 grad transfer on the market. Deshaun Corprew was a big-time JUCO prospect, former top 100 recruit, I believe. And then Kevon Moore was a top 50 recruit. So it's hard to kind of argue with how they've reloaded. I think the biggest difference to me between where I think Texas Tech fans think that they should be ranked and where most people have them is I think there's going to be a little more struggle with Matt Mooney playing point guard than people realize. He was primarily used as a more secondary creator, I believe. And then at the center position, I think Texas Tech fans have been really overrating Tariq Owens because I've seen him a lot during his time at St. John's, and he kind of looks the part where he blocks shots, he plays with a lot of energy, but there seems to be a kind of misconception going around that he's like a stretch 5. And while he can hit a 3, that's not where you want him playing. He's not much of an offensive player. Just kind of the points per game numbers that he's accumulated. So I think that's kind of where this disconnect is coming, where like a lot of Texas Tech fans think that they should be easily in the top 25.
Yeah, Brad pretty much hit the nail on the head there. This is pretty much a new look team. And obviously Keenan Evans is not someone who's going to be easy to replace. He's a guy that bailed this team out time and time again the last 2 years. I thought he was an All-American level player last year, so he's going to be a tough replacement. But I think something that's kind of flown under the radar with this team is the loss of Zach Smith. He's not going to hurt them a ton production-wise, but he was really the catalyst defensively for them for the last few years. Just a really, really good defensive player. He got hurt last year as well, so that kind of affected them defensively. So those are the two things that I'm really keying in on. And obviously, you lose 5 or 6 seniors. Zaire Smith is an NBA draft pick, so there's a lot to replace. And I agree. I think they did a good job in this offseason, bringing in guys like Mooney and Owens. You guys mentioned Kevon Moore. I don't think Jarrett Culver is going to take the step up some people think he's going to. I think he's a very good player, but I don't see him as like a number one option offensively. I just don't know if he can be that type of guy for them. But they're really deep, so it's going to be interesting to see how Chris Beard fits in all these new pieces. But definitely going to be a fun team to watch. And I'm already getting sick of their fans. Their 5 minutes of success has already turned their fan base into a little bit insufferable for me.
Yeah, I was going to ask you guys about Culver and what you think of the step up he's going to make, because as you said, those Texas Tech fans have been all over, I think all of us this summer, telling us how great Jarrett Culver is going to be. And Culver was excellent as a freshman, coming in as lowly regarded as he was as a recruit. That makes it sound like he was bad as a recruit, but he just wasn't highly regarded. As on the season, he averaged 11 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, shot 38% from 3, 46% from the field. He showed the ability to play that prototypical 3 role where he could shoot the ball, put the ball on the deck a little bit. But he's going to have to step up and be so much more. He was even better in conference play. Shot the ball at 42% in conference play. I don't know if that's a number that's sustainable for him. We'll kind of see what happens. But the pressure is definitely on him to take a significant step in scoring. I mean, Matt Mooney can really get a bucket. I'm sure they'll look to him a lot. Deshaun Corprew, I think, will slide in next to Culver on the wing, and then probably play Kevon Moore at the 4. I've heard good things about how he's coming off that injury that he suffered last season and missed most of his high school year, and then Tarek Owens at the 5 as that role where he can block shots, and then you can kind of fill out a bench from there. I think that's a pretty workable rotation. I think it's probably an NCAA tournament team with Chris Beard at the helm. I just don't think it's a top 25 team the way Texas Tech fans maybe aggressively ranking them.
Yeah, I have them at number 35 nationally, which puts them pretty safely in the NCAA tournament. I think that makes them like a 9 seed. But kind of mentioned earlier the disconnect with Tarek Owens, and then Culver. I like Culver. I don't have too strong of a feeling either way in terms of him, living up to these lofty expectations or not. I could see that falling either way. I think another guy who Texas Tech fans are certainly very excited about in terms of taking the next step is Davide Moretti, the combo guard who was the backup point guard last year. He's someone who, he was in the rotation last year. He's going to be in the rotation this year. A lot of people think he can take a next step given his performance, I believe, on, what was it, U19 or U20 FIBA tournament. But that's a dangerous game to look at the stats that were put up in that and then try to translate that to like a breakout season. We saw it earlier a few years ago with Stephen Enoch, who was on UConn, and he had like a dominating performance for, I think, Egypt. And then he was, just like an average backup center, if that, for UConn.
And Tony, where do you slot in Texas Tech before we move on?
I have them like right on the cusp, so I would probably say same as Brad, like a top 35 team. I still think they're an NCAA tournament team. I still think they're going to be probably in the middle of the pack in the Big 12. So I still think they're going to be pretty good, but definitely going to take a little bit of a step back this year.
And Chris Beard is good of a coach in college basketball. I mean, 3 years ago, wasn't even hadn't had a D1 opportunity. Takes the Little Rock job, turns them into a 30-win team his first season. Then comes to Texas Tech, 27 wins and a 3 seed in year 2. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that the guy can coach, and I'll generally trust him to be able to figure things out with an athletic roster and his ability to recruit. Moving on to West Virginia. West Virginia coming off a season, they went 26-11, but they lose the heart and soul of that team in Javon Carter as well as Daxter Miles in the backcourt. But still a team that a lot of people have high expectations for. Sagaba Kanate is back after testing the draft waters, the elite shot blocker who showed some ability to play offense in his face-up game during the draft process. Guys like Lamont West and Issa Ahmad will make up a really dangerous front court, but then some questions in the backcourt to have to fill for this West Virginia club.
Yeah, so I think West Virginia might have the kind of the best wing collection in the country in terms of length and athleticism and kind of fitting their style. Where they have, you mentioned Asa Ahmad and Lamont West. That, they can play inside and out. They can shoot a little bit. They can play some three, play some four. They also have Wesley Harris, who's a tremendous defensive asset who can guard 1 through 4. He might be suspended to start the year. There was some kind of, it wasn't there like an arrest or something recently, and then to kind of add on that, they have a fourth kind of multi-positional athletic wing who should play a lot of minutes, and that's Jermaine Haley, who's a glue guy in the kind of Kyle Anderson sort of mold, like not Kyle Anderson for UCLA, but the kind of role that Kyle Anderson is playing in the NBA right now, where he's a glue guy. He moves the ball, not a great shooter, but at 6'7", he can play some kind of point forwardy type of role.
And Tony, your thoughts on how they solve this backcourt? Because as much as there's talent in the front court, there's definitely some questions up there.
Yeah, honestly, I think that is the question to be answered, is how they move on with without Javon Carter. He was the face of the program the last few years. If they can find a serviceable replacement, I think they should be fine. Obviously, we're looking at guys like Brandon Napper. He's somebody that the fans are excited about. Obviously, Jordan McCabe is a pretty solid recruit. So if one of those guys can fill that role serviceably, I'm not saying replace Javon Carter. That's not going to happen. I think they should be fine. As Brad said, I still think they have one of the better front courts in college basketball with Konate in the middle. Obviously, as he said, West and Harris. I'm hoping Asa Ahmad can get back on track this year. I think the suspension kind of really slowed him down last year. I think he just never got on track when he came back from his half-year suspension. And then I really like James Bolden. I think he's going to be one of their best scoring options. Kid can really shoot the three. He's going to get a much bigger opportunity this year. So I'm a bit concerned about their perimeter shooting, but I don't think they were great last year. But again, if they can find a serviceable point guard, I still think West Virginia is going to be one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the Big 12.
Yeah, I personally really like the possibilities in the backcourt. There's a lot of question marks, obviously, but Napper looks great on film. Whether that translates to excellent play out of the gate, but playing at Hargrave Military Academy, one of the better prep programs in the country, he looks just like an absolute stud. So you've got Napper, James Bolden, who's like that combo, the undersized combo guard. You could play him at the 2 with Napper at the 1. Then you could even, if you wanted a third ball handler, put in Jermaine Haley, have him play the 3. There's just a lot of options because Haley is such a good passer from that big physical guard role. And then Konate is the other guy I really wanted to touch on. And guys, I don't know how much hype you're buying. I'm trying to be a little cautious on this Sagaba Konate is going to be an All-American hype train. But with as good of a shot blocker as he is, just incremental improvements on defense, on offense would make him just one of the best in the country.
Yeah, I don't. Sorry, Brad, you want to take it first?
No, so you.
Yeah, I don't see it. I think he's a tremendous defensive player, one of the best shot blockers in the country. I don't see him developing a good enough offensive game to be an All-American. I really don't. I think he'll probably average a dozen points, maybe 13, 14 at the most this year, but I don't see him as that level of a player. On the defensive end, he's tremendous, but I just don't see that good of an offensive game to bump him up to an All-American level talent.
I agree with Tony in the sense that I don't think he will be that he will be an All-American in terms of the actual award, but I do think he's an All-American caliber player. I do think that the voting can kind of have too much of an emphasis on a combination of the point per game and the team success, where I'm a little lower on West Virginia than most people, but I'm very high on Konate. I think he could work his way into the first round of the NBA draft. At the combine, he flashed a little more skill offensively, and I think that with a little more freedom and becoming more of a focal point, I think Asa Ahmad's probably the focal point, and then Bolden and Konate in there as well. So I think he should get more offensive opportunity and kind of flourish from there.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how his how his offensive game does kind of take that step forward, because he just showed a little bit of potential at the combine where it was like his jump shot didn't look broken and like he dribbled and people were like, oh my God, he's like the next coming, and it was like, guys, we watched 2 scrimmages. Let's pump the brakes here just a little bit. But I still think the hype is warranted with this West Virginia team overall. I think this is a fringe top 15 team. I have to do a top 25, but I think I'm going to have them in the top 15 going into the season. I'm gonna have them second in the Big 12, but I don't know where you guys have them kind of nationally.
I have them at 15 in my poll.
So I have them 30th nationally.
Wow.
So the reason why I'm lower is pretty much the point guard play, where in the backcourt in general, where Javon Carter and Daxter Miles were 4-year starters. They were the starters since they were freshmen. And having guards that were that experienced and that good, they're both in the NBA right now. That's so valuable. And I think Bolden proved that he can be a solid scorer. He was a nice spark plug off the bench for them. But that's a big step down going from Carter and Miles to now any combination of Bolden, Napper, and Haley. I think that's a bigger step down than a lot of people realize and a lot of West Virginia fans want to admit. And I think that they're going to have some growing pains despite how set and how versatile this front court is.
I mean, I totally see like what you're suggesting. I generally think West Virginia's been able to figure it out under Huggins because of the defense and the front court, and I'm big on guys like Napper and Bolden stepping up to bigger roles. But if they even if they even falter a little bit, this could fall off pretty quick into that 30 to 40 range, like you have them. So definitely a reasonable take. I don't think that's anything to be questioned too much. Next team, moving on.
Could I say one thing on,
sure.
on West Virginia? The composite has them 16th overall. The highest person has them 8th.
Ooh.
And there are one person, being myself, with them not in the top 25. The person who has them 8th is Kyle Kinsing.
Fascinating. Yeah, Brad has done a great job, Tony, of compiling these composite top 25s, basically taking every college basketball analyst he can's top 25 and putting them into like a rankings list. And it's been pretty useful for us as we've been doing our deep dive previews to kind of see where the national folks really see them instead of just kind of a feel thing.
Yeah, that's an excellent idea. Thank you, Brad.
No problem.
Moving on to Kansas State. Kansas State came in 4th last year in the Big 12, but had that Elite 8 run. Partially fortuitous thanks to Virginia being knocked out by UMBC, but partially by some really big plays made by this team. And they basically run it back. Everybody coming back from Barry Brown, Dean Wade, Xavier Sneed, Kamau Stokes, Cartier Jara, like the entire roster virtually back except for Mato Sala, who was a little used big man, and also Ahmad Wainwright, who was, I believe, transferred. But they also just don't really bring much in. The only key newcomer is Austin Trice, one of the biggest rebounders in the country in junior college out of Wabash Valley College. Average, I think, 12 rebounds a game. So he can help this team's rebounding in an area where they struggled last season. But are either of you buying the big jump that this team is being projected to make into the top 10 to 15 nationally?
It's tough because I think a lot of times we put a little bit too much stock in an NCAA tournament run sometimes, where a team like Kansas State last year, is a 8-9 seed and they win a couple games in the tournament and all of a sudden, people are putting them in their top 15. I actually am. I love their experience. They got seniors everywhere. And they're really the team with the least question marks outside of Kansas in the Big 12, in my opinion. They have like I said, they have a slew of experienced guys back. My guess is they have to be one of the most older teams in the country. I like Bruce Weber. I think he's a really good coach. You might disagree with me. I think a lot of people do. They have an NBA guy in Dean Wade. They have a great backcourt. I think Barry Brown is one of the more undervalued guys in college basketball. Kamau Stokes is going to be healthy this year. I think that's going to be a big boost for them. Cartier Diarra looks like one of the more up-and-coming guys in the Big 12. So I like this team a lot, and I think Xavier Sneed is another guy that gets undervalued. I think he's one of the better defenders. He's a decent shooter, kind of one of those guys that can guard the best player on the opposing team. Their front court isn't strong, but I think the guy that you mentioned, Kevin, Austin Trice, is going to help up there. So if they can, work out their front court and get some production from somebody outside of Dean Wade, I think they're going to be pretty good. I think they're the second best team in the conference.
So I also have Kansas State as the second best team in the Big 12, but I have them a little lower than most people. I have them at 17, and mostly for the reason that Tony mentioned to start there was, they made the Elite Eight, but they were 8 or 9 seed. And I think it is really important when you're kind of projecting for the next year to almost discount entirely what happens in the NCAA tournament. So I don't think I have Kansas State any higher than I would had they lost in the first round to Creighton. And I think it's also important to note, they got one of the luckiest second round draws of all time, where they were supposed to get Virginia, and then they get this UMBC team that even almost beat Kansas State in what was one of the worst games I've ever watched in my entire life. But to get that 16 seed instead of the 1 seed is probably the number one reason why they went to the Elite Eight. Not even what great roster that they assembled.
Can I just say something quick though?
Yeah, go for it.
I think we have to definitely though give them credit for beating Kentucky. They beat Kentucky without Dean Wade, and absolutely. I thought Kentucky was an absolute horrible matchup for Kansas State. With that front court that Kentucky has, so I think you got to give them a little credit, but I definitely understand what you're saying with beating a 16 seed in the second round for sure.
And this also kind of reminds me of Seton Hall from last year, where Tony definitely remembers that I had Seton Hall as my number, I think 10 or 11 team in the preseason, kind of based on they bring everybody back, and then I convinced myself that the guys that they were bringing in were going to be more impactful than they ended up being. I think it's like almost a direct parallel to this Kansas State team, to where Seton Hall last year, I told myself, they were a top 30 team the year before, but Ish Sanogo is finally going to be healthy. With the Kansas State, it's now Kamau Stokes is finally going to be healthy. Thinking that guys like Sandro Mamakilishvili was going to have a bigger impact, right? I think that's kind of what's happening with like Austin Trice a little bit, where he's like their one newcomer and or like one of their only newcomers, and you kind of make yourself believe that that's going to be enough of an addition to the roster to kind of vault them up. Where maybe this is me just course correcting too much from last year, but I think that they didn't really do enough to add to their roster to warrant such a high jump.
Well, I think the thing for me when I'm evaluating these teams that just run it back is, where are they going to make that significant improvement in order to make that significant improvement nationally? And like Seton Hall, like they still have the same problems of like bad shooting team, no real point guard, not very deep, average coach, not a lot of leadership, where like a talented roster was held back. Kansas State, I mean, last year they were horrible on the boards. Now, Austin Trice gives them a chance to improve there. Kansas State won the turnover margin. That was a big deal. But they're not an explosive offense. They ran solid, efficient offense, not great from three, but not horrible. Like where do they take that next step? I think it's probably that offensive efficiency, especially a guy like Stokes could be a lot more efficient. I think Mike McGurl has a chance to be really good. He showed some flashes in the conference tournament and in the NCAA tournament. He was a guy I liked out of high school. I thought he was pretty underrated. So we'll see if they have a guy who can help them make that next step, because Trice is the most obvious name who could really make an impact.
Yeah, I think defensively they're one of the better teams in the country. They were number 2 in the Big 12 last year. So they're going to be in a lot of games because of their defense. If they can just, improve just a little bit on offense this year, I think they'll be where we think they're going to be.
Yep. So in terms of the composite, Kansas State comes in at number 12, and the person with them the highest is Joe Nardone, who has them at number 8, and then Aaron Torres has them the lowest at number 18. So very limited range there for Kansas State. Most people have them in that kind of 11 to 13 kind of little range there with Virginia Tech as well. So not a lot of diversity of opinion there.
Which means there's no chance that they finish in that range. Let's move on to TCU. The Horned Frogs had a very promising start to last season under Jamie Dixon, but derailed a little bit by Jalen Fisher's injury to his knee. He's continuing to deal with knee injuries this offseason, which I think remains a pretty big storyline with this club and probably the biggest key to their season. And while they do lose Vlad Brodzianski and Kenrich Williams from this club, there's a lot of talent coming in, and there's a lot of talent returning on this roster. Desmond Bain, Kawat Noy, Alex Robinson, all back for one more season along with Fisher and Jamie Dixon. I think one of the best coaches in college basketball. I'm pretty high on this club, assuming that the Fisher can be healthy.
Yeah, I think that the whole future of this team rides on Jalen Fisher, because I mean they were riding high. They were one of the last they were one of the last teams to take a loss. They were playing pretty well going through the Big 12 until Fisher's injury, and then they kind of just kept their head above water enough, and kind of that combined with playing in the Big 12 where almost every game is a quality win, and then what they did in the NCAA tournament. I think that they were, in terms of their overall kind of team quality, I think that they were probably closer to a 10 seed than a 6 seed without Fisher.
Yeah, guys, I just want to give you some quick news before I talk about TCU. Jaquan Lyle ruptured Achilles tendon, out for the year for New Mexico.
Oh, no.
That's it for New Mexico.
Bubble-wise. Yeah, at least for Bubble. I mean,
yeah.
Who's going to play? They're going to play Keith McGee at point guard then, but
yeah,
man. I had assumed when other fans were talking about him being in a walking boot at their football game, I just kind of assumed that he had sprained an ankle and it was an abundance of caution thing. But
right,
man, that's brutal.
Huge loss. Yeah, so for me, the Horned Frogs are definitely one of the more intriguing teams. One of the teams I'm most excited about actually this off season. But, the Jalen Fisher injury has me a little concerned. The injuries are starting to pile up with him. So that's definitely an issue we're going to have to monitor. So it's going to be something I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye on when he comes back this year. But, if he comes back and can get healthy, it's definitely a team I'm excited about, as I said. They certainly have some key pieces they have to replace. Kenrich Williams, Vlad Verdansky, those guys are really good. But you still have 4 guys, and, Fisher, Kawat Noy, Desmond Bain is a kid I'm really excited about, Alex Robinson. All those guys are double-digit level scorers, and even a guy like J.D. Miller can do that on any given night. So, last year they were really good offensively. They shot the 3 at a really high level. It's really the defensive end for me where they have to improve. I think they gave up over 75 points a game last year. That's a number they definitely got to improve on, but I think Desmond Bain is ready to take that next step and be an all Big 12 level player. Just an explosive scorer, big body guy. I think he's 6'5", 220. So he's the guy. If he can take that next step and be one of the better scorers in the league, I think TCU could be pretty good. I think they're a top 25 team if they're healthy. And I think they have some pretty good size up front, as I said, with Noy Miller. And they have a freshman in Kevin Samuel, who's 6'11", 265. So if he can give them some minutes, I like this team a lot if Fisher's healthy.
Yeah, I think that probably the biggest key for TCU in terms of figuring out this starting lineup, obviously Fisher's health is probably the biggest key. But, kind of in terms of assuming he's healthy, they need a replacement for Brodzianski. I was never the biggest Brodzianski guy. I thought he was wildly overrated. People had him as a second-round NBA draft pick, which I thought was absurd. But he was a very good college player, and they need to kind of fill his hole there at the center position. I think Alec, who I believe is a top 2 or 3 JUCO player in the country, and Kevin Samuel, as Tony mentioned earlier, those are kind of the 2 guys there who are probably going to see most of the minutes. They need one of them to kind of emerge, unless they're going to kind of go with a smaller look and go with either Miller or or Noy at that small ball 5. And to kind of echo what Tony was saying, I'm also a very big Desmond Bain guy and think he could really take a next step this season.
I think what I love about this TCU team is they just do a very good job of sharing the ball, especially when Fisher's there with Alex Robinson. Two excellent passers, two guys who are not only excellent passers, but also do a pretty good job of taking care of the ball. Robinson had a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio last season. That was partially hurt by the fact that he didn't have Fisher as a running mate for much of the season, much of Big 12 play when he's dealing with constant pressure. Both guys can really dish the ball out, and then you have Bain and Noy who are good shooters, who can put the ball on the deck. I'm excited to see Noy as a guy who's a lot of people are projecting to break out. You can play those guys at the 3 and the 4, and then your 5 is Alok, who can just kind of do the little things on defense and protect the rim. That would be the biggest improvement he could provide, would be a better rim protector than what Brodzianski was. He averaged 1.7 blocks a game, Brodzianski, but I think part of that was just tempo. They played pretty fast, so he had a lot of opportunities. I think there's a chance for some improvement on the rim protection side that could help their defense. I think you're always going to be limited defensively when you're going to play small, especially if you're going to play 2 small guards like Alex Robinson and Jalen Fisher. It's not quite the extreme that you go to with like a Marquette with Rousey and Marcus Howard, but it's always going to be tough when you're playing 2 guys under 6'2" in one of the best conferences in the league to defend at those spots.
So are we ready for the composite?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
All right, so they come in at 22nd nationally, and the high person has them at number 15, and that's Rob Doster. And then 5 people have them completely unranked, which I'm not totally against. I personally have them at number 20, and kind of the first team of kind of a new tier where I think that there's a pretty big drop-off from the team I have at number 19 being Florida, and then the team TCU being 20. I think that's where you get like a steep enough drop-off where after Florida, any team after that for me is, could be one of any 10 to 15 different teams to fill out your top 25.
Yeah, I have them just outside the top 25 right now, but you could make definitely a case in that 20 to 25 range.
Yeah, I have TCU at 25. In my original earlier top 25 this preseason, I had them a few spots higher, but then Jalen Fisher tore up his knee, so I bumped them down a few spots because that just has me concerned. He's just been an injury-prone type of player the last couple of years here. So I have them at 25. I think that's more than fair.
All right, let's continue to move on now. 4 teams tied for 6th last season at 8 and 10 in the conference. We'll do the alphabetical thing again, which means we'll start with Baylor. 19 and 15 record for the Bears, but a lot of roster turnover. This is not going to be the same team this year. They lose guys like Manu Lecomte, Joe Lual-Achuil, Nuni Omat, and TJ Maston, but they do bring in a lot of really interesting pieces. 2 transfers who will sit out this season in Maceo Teague from UNC Asheville and Davion Mitchell, who comes in from Auburn. They also bring in a couple of JUCO players. Devontae Bandu's a very well-regarded guy who comes in from those JUCO ranks, as well as Darius Allen. And then a sit-out transfer who coming in, Mario Kegler from Mississippi State, and Makai Mason, grad transfer from Yale, has had 2 years basically lost due to injury, but he has a ton of potential. I think he's the key to the team. Tony and Brad, I think it's just he's so important.
Yeah, Kevin, I was just going to say that, Baylor to me definitely disappointed last year, in my opinion, which rarely happens. They always seem to overachieve, which is kind of a testament to Scott Drew. I think he's an excellent coach. They're kind of on my wait and see list because if Makai Mason is healthy and plays well, they could be pretty good. I think if Tristan Clark has a breakout year, which I think he can, I think they're going to be in a lot better shape. I do think the Jake Lindsey injury is a pretty big blow, though. Not production-wise per se, but he's a really integral part to what they do. Kind of a glue guy, a really key veteran. So I think that was a really big loss. He's going to transfer, redshirt this year and play next year. Mario Kegler is the kid I'm really excited about. He's talented, as you said, Mississippi State transfer. So, the cupboard isn't bare, but I definitely think they needed quite a few things to break right for them to, stick in the top half of the league. I have them closer towards the bottom. I think I have them at 8th. I have to double check, but if, like I said, if Clark can break out, if Mason can stay healthy, I think they can still compete. I think Scott Drew is that good of a coach to keep them near the middle of the pack.
Yeah, so I am pretty down on Baylor. I feel like compared to most, I have them as an NIT team and coming in at 8th in the conference. I'm just not buying Makai Mason's health. You know, it's one thing for me if like you tear your ACL and then you tear it again or something, where it's like 2 major injuries in consecutive seasons when like you know that the person's going to be out. But I believe with a Mason, the hope was for him to play last year, and it just kept on getting pushed and pushed. And I think he played in 1 game and then shut it down the rest of the way. That's more concerning to me, where it's like, you know, they can't figure it out, or like, you know, they think he should be good to go, but he's not. That gives me a lot of pause. You know, really projecting anything in terms of production for Mason and for Baylor this year. I thought, you know, Tony mentioned this, but Lindsey was a huge part of this team. I thought he could even be the starting point guard coming in, but now with him out for the season, point guard is a real question in a league like the Big 12, where there's so many, you know, solid, talented NCAA tournament level squads. You know, that's not what you want when you have, you know, you lose your 4 best scorers from last season, and then on top of it have point guard questions for this year.
Yeah, I think Lindsey would have had a great chance to start at point guard, where you could have paired him with like a Jared Butler, although he came in with the injury to Lindsey, so possibly Butler may not have ever made it to Baylor had he not. But you could have started him with a freshman or a JUCO player who can also handle the ball. I know Devontae Bandu averaged about 3 assists a game at Hutchinson Community College, one of the better JUCO recruits in the country, where you could have paired Lindsey with another kind of combo guard and hoped that you could find a way to get solid ball handling and distribution out of that group. It's just really hard to project how this roster is going to look. Is Mario Kegler going to guard 4s? Is he like, I wonder where you guys see Mario Kegler. I mean, I've read things that have said Mario Kegler was practicing defending Manu Lecomte much of last season, not only to help Lecomte by dealing with length, but to help Kegler. I mean, if he can guard a guy who's as shifty as Manu Lecomte, I mean, you have to be very excited about what he can bring to the table, regardless of what the point guard concerns may be.
Well, he's 230 pounds, so if he can guard Manu Lecomte, that's pretty darn impressive to me.
Yeah, I mean, with Baylor's 1-1-3 zone that they usually run, or it's really just like a 2-3, except they just play it back a little bit more. Kegler's, maybe they'll try to play Kegler at the top and try to create some turnovers that way. I'm also very high on Kegler. I think I ranked him as like a top 5 transfer, or maybe even higher. Coming into the year, guys who put up the numbers he did, almost 10 points a game as a freshman, that's a lot more impressive than it sounds.
Yeah, another kid to watch out for I like is Mark Vital. He's a kid who's like a bull. He's a bull. He's like a football player on the court, a really good rebounder for his size. I think he's pretty small, but he averaged almost 6 rebounds a game last year, and he's only 6'5". So I think he's going to be a pretty valuable player for them this year. He's a good defender, so if he can maybe up his offensive production a little bit, that'll definitely help the Bears.
I think for me, just with this club, it feels like a 2-year window where you've got these 2 great JUCO players that are there. You've got Maceo T getting eligible, Davion Mitchell getting eligible, Kegler will still be there next year. I feel like next year is the great target year for them to really explode. They'll only lose Mason, who we really don't know what to expect, and King McClure next season. They'll get Lindsey back. You feel really good about this team going forward. But I wanted to ask you guys before we finished on Baylor, what you think of what Scott Drew's done in terms of his recruiting, because this is a guy who was able to get some really high level recruits like an Isaiah Austin, like a Rico Gathers, like a Perry Jones throughout his time early in his tenure. And those have kind of dried up. He got number 93 and number 97 in this class, and then some more underrated prospects. But he's really done a good job of going from alternative routes to get these high high major talents, Macy O.T., Davion Mitchell, both
Yeah.
transfers, Mario Kegler. I mean, what do you think of the way he's been able to recruit? I know you said you really like Drew as a coach, even though he kind of gets a bad rap around college basketball. It's kind of dirty.
Yeah, I don't think he's very well liked. I don't think he's the greatest guy in the world, but you're right. He's not getting the high level high school recruits, and he's going a different direction, and he's doing it via the transfer, which a lot of coaches are doing these years. He took a program that was basically dead, and he's made it into maybe it's definitely one of the more consistent programs, not only in the Big 12 but in college basketball. I mean, they're in the NCAA tournament almost every year. They've been at the Sweet 16 a million times. So I think he's done a fantastic job. I don't think he gets enough credit. They always seem to overachieve. That's why I said earlier in my comments, I'm going to probably pick them 7th or 8th in the conference, but I wouldn't be shocked if they finish 5th or even 4th. They always seem to be better than we anticipate.
Yeah, so they obviously didn't make the NCAA tournament last year, but then the 4 years before that, they made it all 4 of those years, including 2 Sweet 16s.
Right.
I think that, personally for me, I'm leaning more and more toward, kind of what Tony was saying earlier was it doesn't really matter how you get the players, just get them, whether they be transfers, whether they be JUCOs, whatever you can do to kind of get the necessary talent in there, you should do it. I still see a lot of fans this kind of negative stigma on transfers where they say, that's not how you should build a program, or, oh, those aren't your players. Those are the players of school X, Y, and Z. I saw that a lot with the Nevada last year where people were like, oh, that's not Nevada's program. That's NC State's, Purdue's, and whoever else. Jordan Caroline was from Southern Illinois. That's just foolish to me. If you can get more talent via transfer than you can via recruiting, you should grab a transfer every time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, completely agree. Let's move on to the Oklahoma schools. Let's start with Oklahoma State. Last year came in with a new coach in Mike Boynton after losing Brad Underwood surprisingly to Illinois, and they way overachieved. I mean, a lot of people were down on the Boynton hire. They were down on this program, and Boynton did a really tremendous job. In my opinion, this should have been an NCAA tournament team. They kind of got the short end of the stick due to having a really bad RPI because of some games they scheduled in the non-conference, but they beat Kansas multiple times. Jeffrey Carroll was excellent. Kendall Smith, was a very good grad transfer from Cal State Northridge. This team played really hard. They pressed a lot. They were a team that really seemed like they had a lot of fun playing together, but they lose a lot of guys. Carroll's gone, Smith's gone, and then Mitch Solomon as well. And then they lose a couple guys they really couldn't afford to lose early, and Tavarius Shine and Brandon Averett, who I thought both were positioned for excellent years. Both wound up leaving the program, as did Yankuba Sima, who would have gotten some minutes up front. And the cupboard's pretty bare. There's not a ton of this isn't an elite recruiting class with guys who are going to come in and make huge immediate impacts. You're going to rely a lot on Cam McGriff, I think, to step in. They just have no size. They don't have a clear point guard, especially with Michael Weathers now suspended indefinitely. I think the backcourt's kind of sneaky good with Curtis Jones coming in midseason, Mike Cunningham, Isaac Likely, all guys who should be able to play Big 12 minutes. But I think they're going to just have to go really small with Cam McGriff at the 5. And then just blitz you with guards and press like crazy and just play like a Brad Underwood type style at Oklahoma State. I just don't know that they have the personnel, especially if Weathers is unable to go.
Yeah, I think if anything last year told you that Mike Boynton was definitely the right guy for this job, that team was projected to be really, really bad. And, they go out, they win 21 games, they won 8 games in the conference, and they got an NIT berth. So I think that was a really successful first season for Mike Boynton and the future of this program. You said it, you kind of nailed it, Kevin. Looking at this year's team, just a slew of newcomers. I think they have like eight new guys that are going to probably be in the rotation. Cam McGriff, I think, is a breakout guy in this conference. Somebody you didn't mention who I really like is Lindy Waters. He's been a solid guard for them the last few years. I think he's ready to take that next step, and I think he's going to get the opportunities this year with all the guys that they've lost. The Michael Weathers situation really disturbs me because, I would feel a little bit better about this team, but we don't know how long that suspension is going to be. It was a felony charge, so we'll have to kind of wait and see on that. But again, it's going to be a complete overhaul. It's probably going to be a transition year. I'd probably peg Oklahoma State for maybe like a last place finish possibly, but they surprised us last year. So who knows, maybe they can bump up a couple spots, but I definitely think it's going to be a transition year and heading into 2019-20.
Yeah, I think that, this team probably has more talent than people realize. I really like Cam McGriff. He's one of my favorite players to watch in the Big 12. And, Michael Weathers is considered one of the best transfers, but, I mean, he averaged, I think, like 4.6 turnovers a game two seasons ago, and he was a freshman at Miami of Ohio. I think that, they have maybe 4 or 5 pretty good players, but it really falls off after that. This is a team with a pretty questionable depth, and I think that's going to hurt them. Not having like a clear star level talent and then not having a ton of depth. That's a recipe for disaster. I have the Cowboys 9th in the Big 12 and 98th nationally.
Yeah, I'm going to have them 10th. I'm just not very high on them. The good news, they do have help coming. Avery Anderson's a 4-star commit. They also have 2 other commits in Kalen Boone and Caleb Boone. So I'm assuming those are twins, although I do not know that for a fact. Coming in 19, so already 3 commits. Mike Boyden is continuing to prove he can be the guy for this job. It's just going to take a little bit of time. I mean, this is going to be a young team with the exception of Cunningham, the grad transfer from USC Upstate. They'll bring everybody back in theory if Weathers stays with the program, and likely I think is a good foundational piece, an underrated recruit coming out of high school. So I think the future can be bright. It's just going to take them some time to develop these guys. They're just so young up front, and so it's going to be tough. Anything you guys have to add on this club?
Nope.
No, I think that's pretty much it.
All right, let's move on to the Oklahoma Sooners. The Trae Young show last season. This team is going to be really kind of interesting because I wrote this in my Big 12 preview, which will drop in about 2 weeks on my website. But I personally don't think the talent around Trae Young was as bad as they got the rap for, because I think they got so pigeonholed into what they were to do to help Trae Young that they kind of forgot how to play basketball. Like Christian James, a Cam McGusty, even a Brady Manick. I felt like those guys were more talented players than they showed in the system, just because they were kind of pigeonholed as just shooters around Trae. And then as Trae got beat up as the season went along, they really did struggle. I just really don't have high expectations for this club. They have a couple of grad transfers coming in to try to balloon the point guard situation, keep them relevant at that spot. I mean, when you consider the fact that a lot of people didn't think Trae Young was a one-and-done prospect coming out of high school. I mean, losing him early was definitely a big blow for this program. Like we said, those unexpected early departures are always tough for a coach to deal with in recruiting because you have to play so far down the line. They do have Austin Reeves coming in, who will be sitting out this season as a transfer. They also have a pretty good signing class coming in for the following season, headlined by Davion Harmon, who's a top recruit. But this feels like very much a transition year in Norman.
Yeah, I definitely agree. As you said, Kevin, last year was the Trae Young show, and I think it kind of hurt the development of some of the other players. I remember this specifically. They were playing at Texas Tech on the road, and Christian James, who I think is a pretty good shooter and a pretty talented offensive player, late in the game had a wide open 3-point shot, and he wanted absolutely nothing to do with it, and he flicked it off to Trae Young, and I saw that quite a bit last season. And you said it, Kevin. It was kind of like they were just facilitating and trying to figure out how to help Trae Young, and that play always stuck out to me for some reason. I think the offense obviously will be more free flowing this year, more spread out. I'm just not sure. Do they have any high level Big 12 talent to compete near the top half of the league? I don't think so. Christian James is a solid player. Brady Manick, Rashard Odoms, Jamuni McNeese. I just don't know anybody if they have that top end talent to compete with the top half of the league. I just don't see it. I like Miles Reynolds a lot, the Pacific transfer, average I think 14 a game for the Tigers. And they have to play some semblance of defense. Last year they did not do that. So if they can improve on the defensive end and maybe, spread out that offense this year, they can maybe be okay. But I think it's going to be a pretty rough year, Norman, as you said.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with Oklahoma, and you mentioned they didn't expect to lose Trae Young after this year, and no one really, for the most part, thought that he was going to be a one and done. So like you can't really get a strong sit out transfer who would have been eligible this year, or like a strong 2018 recruit, because they're going to be playing behind Trae Young. Now that he's not there, they really had to kind of scrap together a point guard rotation. And I mean, Miles Reynolds, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't even the point guard at Pacific. And then Aaron Calix, was on one of the worst teams or could have been the worst team in college basketball at Maine, and had very high turnover numbers. And I don't know if this team can, it was so built around Trae Young last year. Can it adjust? And guys like, you guys mentioned like Christian James and Brady Manick take a more aggressive, like a more aggressive approach in the offense. I'm not sure about that. And then I think that they could, find some success if they played a guy like Christian Doolittle at the 5 with Manick at the 4. Be a little smaller, be a little more athletic. Doolittle had a very good freshman season than last year. Kind of similar to Issa Ahmad. He was out the first semester, and Manick was playing well enough at the time where he was kind of relegated to a small role. Manick fell off at the end of the season. They put Doolittle back in, but he still didn't have the same sort of positive impact that he did as a freshman.
Yeah, Doolittle's a guy I'm definitely watching. I'm also watching McNeese. It's interesting because I sort of agree that going small might be the best way for this team to attack, because they can be super versatile and switchy and space you out. Give guys like Aaron Calixte and Miles Reynolds, Christian James a little more space to operate, especially in the pick and roll style that I expect Lon Kruger will continue to deploy. But Jimani McNeese can really block shots. I think he has high upside. I mean, you start to wonder if the offense hasn't come yet, when will it ever come? But he'll certainly get a lot of opportunities this year in a rebuilding club. It'll be interesting to see kind of that dynamic of, do we go small or do we try to play through McNeese a little bit more? I don't know that it's necessarily a recipe for success to play through McNeese, but it certainly would be good for his long-term pro prospects.
And so then, personally, I have Oklahoma last. I don't know where you guys have them. I'm guessing around that same range.
I got him 9.
Yeah, I have him 9 as well.
All right, let's move on to the final team that tied in that cluster in the bottom tier of the conference. That would be the Texas Longhorns. Texas, up and down season last year. They go 19-15. Definitely not what they had necessarily hoped for, with Mo Bamba coming into the program, and they lose in the first round of the heartbreaker to Nevada in the NCAA tournament. They lost Andrew Jones, was I think the biggest storyline last season. And that was not something obviously in their control, losing him as he dealt with cancer. He seems to be back. We'll see when he'll be able to contribute on the basketball floor, but obviously life is much more important than basketball, and we're all glad that Andrew Jones is healthy and ready to go. But surrounding this club, there is a lot of excitement. I'm very high on this team personally. They bring back a lot more than they've been able to bring back in previous years. They finally have some semblance of roster continuity for Shaka Smart. Losing Bamba, but they bring back Matt Coleman. They bring back Andrew Jones, Eric Davis, and Kerwin Roach in the backcourt. And then Jericho Sims up front next to Dylan Osetkowski. And then a very good recruiting class coming in. As always, also get Elijah Long, who's the point guard transfer from Mount St. Mary's, who should factor into the backcourt. So I think this Texas team has a chance to take the next step, but I've been burned by Shaka at Texas before, so I'm still a little bit cautious.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I think this is a big year for Shaka Smart. This is year 4, and they have yet to win an NCAA tournament game since he's been there. So I don't think he's necessarily on the hot seat per se. I think the fans might start to get a little restless for some postseason success. He's had plenty of talent to work with, but as we've talked about, has that talent been the right fit for what they do? They struggle offensively. They can't shoot. They're a horrible free throw shooting team. They're always near the bottom of the Big 12 in scoring offense. The Andrew Jones situation is definitely a key. if he can get back and be healthy, you got to feel really good about this team if he's at full strength. They basically have a solid core back with like 4 double-digit scores. And as Kevin said, they have a pretty solid recruiting class, a couple transfers, as he mentioned. So it just feels like they have a bunch of athletes and is this going to be another case where they just have a bunch of athletes and not any basketball players, if you know what I'm saying, like they've had the last few years? That's kind of how it's felt to me.
Yeah, I think that Texas, maybe could have the deepest backcourt in the country, or at least one of the deepest. But as Tony mentioned, a lot of them are not shooters. Even guys like Jones and Roach are maybe capable shooters. A guy like Jace Febris was like billed as a shooter, but he kind of struggled in that department as a freshman. So it's a lot of talent, but the fit is kind of unclear. They all are very athletic, and that should serve Texas pretty well. I think the front court is another, I think, an underratedly good aspect of this Texas team, where I think Sims and Ozakowski fit together exceptionally well. Sims, being such a good lob target, such a good athlete at that 5 position, and Ozakowski is a lot more skilled than I think a lot of people realize at that power forward spot. He even had to play some 3 last year when Texas was shorthanded. They were running out Ozakowski, Sims, and Bamba together at stretches. The one thing that I think people might not realize is that at least at the U18 USA tournament, Kamaka Hepa was horrendous. He was the worst player on the U.S. team by far, and he was a top 60 recruit. I think a lot of people may see that recruit label, right, the top 60 label, and then a sign that he's going to be a solid backup. But they could be hurting in terms of depth if anything happens to Sims or Ozakowski.
Well, I'm super excited to see Sims. He's a guy who I've hyped up a lot on Twitter. I know Tony is pretty big on him as well. He's just very athletic at 6'9". He can he'd be that perfect lob target, as you said. And with a team that has the guard talent that they'll have between Coleman, who I'm very excited about, potentially Jones, if he can work his way back into full health, and Kerwin Roach, who's terrific, and Courtney Ramey as well, along with Elijah Long. This backcourt's loaded. They're not going to need any post-up looks from Jericho Sims, just to bring a lot of energy, a lot of toughness on the glass, catch some lobs, grab some offensive rebounds. I think he's the perfect fit to do that. I think he's going to be a 10-7 guy this year, and just a really impactful player for this Longhorn club.
Yeah, I agree. I'm still going to put them closer to the bottom. I think I'm going to have them at 7 this year, but because they're just going to have to show me. I think they're one of these teams that everybody gets excited about every year because all the talent they have, and they kind of underachieve in a way. They haven't really blown doors yet since Shaka's been there, so maybe this is the year they can do that.
Yep. So I'm just pulling up the composite right now because I have Texas in the. I have them as the first team out of my top 25 at number 26, which puts them for me at 4th in the conference. Most people have them out of their top 25s, but the high person has them at 22, and that is Kevin Sweeney.
Yes, that poll was a while ago. I have yet to decide whether I'm going to have them in my top 25. I think they're going to be right on the cusp because as I said, I just really like the backcourt. Chaka does have to prove it. I think that's totally fair. But maybe I'll kind of do the insane thing of just trying the same thing over and over again until it works, and hopefully Texas can kind of figure it out, and they're not pressing as much as Shaka's used to. I think that's the one thing with Shaka. If you have concerns about him as a long-term coach at Texas, I think the thing has to be I don't think he's a great X and O coach. I think he's a guy who thrives off energizing and motivating his players, and he lost the biggest benefit of that in the press, and that the energy that could take over an arena, and everything that came with the havoc and getting a lot of easy buckets. I don't think he draws up great offense. I don't think he does a great job of recruiting shooters and all around basketball players. And so I think that's my kind of concern with Shaka long term. I think that's why I think he's an overrated coach in college basketball. But at the same time, he's just done a great job assembling talent on this roster. I think the shooting's going to be better. So I'm going to believe in the Longhorns one more time.
One more time.
And that will bring us to our final team to preview. That is the Iowa State Cyclones. A really tough year last year, 4-14, 14-8 in the Big 12, 14-18, 13-18, excuse me, overall. But this was always kind of seen as a transition year, losing to the guys that they were going to lose, guys like Monty Morris and Deontay Burton. But they did have some bright spots. There was Lindell Wigington, his impressive freshman season. Nick Weiler-Babb had an excellent season as well. They had some impressive displays from Cam Lard and Solomon Young up front, and they got a lot of talent coming in. This is a team I think will be as improved as any team in the country, bringing in two really solid transfers in Mariel Shayok from Virginia, Michael Jacobson from Nebraska, as well as four really good freshmen, including Talon Horton Tucker, a top 50 recruit out of Chicago, George Condit, a rim protector, Tyrese Halliburton, a big-bodied point guard, and then Zion Griffin, who can play on the wing. Definitely a new-look team, but a team that fills that new switchable roster for a pressing athletic team with a lot of good passers that I really enjoy watching. Kind of in the Nevada archetype from this season. A guy like a Horton Tucker and Weiler-Babb are so versatile that you could play. I really want to see them at the 3 and the 4, and then Wigington and Shayok, where the 2 through 4 are just so physical and athletic, where they can rebound and then lead the break and then play Lard at the 5. I think there's going to be a good amount of time with Young at the 4, which does hurt the spacing a little bit. But a lot of different things that this Iowa State team can do, and why I'm so excited about them.
Yeah, Iowa State to me definitely is the most intriguing team in the conference this year. I'm really excited about this club. I think Steve Prohm has done a really good job since taking over the program. He's also kind of kept that transfer train going. As we know, Fred Hoiberg brought in a ton of transfers to this program, and they have a few who are eligible this season, as Kevin mentioned. I think Mariel Shayok and Michael Jacobson, I think both are going to play a pretty pivotal role with this year's team, and I think they're especially going to do that in the experience department. I think this team is still pretty young, if I recall, and also in the depth department as well. I think they were super thin last year, so this is still a somewhat young team. Wigington is really talented. Cam Laird played really well last year. Hopefully he can keep his head on straight. But, as you said, Kevin, I love the versatility of this group. I think Prom can do a lot of different things lineup-wise. And I think they can be an NCAA tournament team if they can, fix things. They didn't do anything well last year. We have to remember that. And we can't get too caught up in the new parts. They still have to play better. So if they can do that, I think they're an NCAA tournament team. I have them at 6. I think they can maybe get up to maybe the 4 spot possibly, but I think 6 is a fair spot for them considering they finished near the bottom last year. So really excited about Iowa State.
I'm also very high on Iowa State coming into the season. I think I was absolutely flabbergasted last year when I saw time after time people had Iowa State in their preseason bracketology. People were ranking them in like the 40s consistently, like early 40s, and I just was like banging my head up against the wall. Like they lost their top 4 leading scorers, and 3 of those guys are now NBA players, which shows you how good they are. And people were kind of just like, oh, Steve Prohm will figure it out. Like Iowa State's always good, whatever excuse there was. Now this year coming in, they have this great roster. It's loaded with depth. They figured out point guard with Weiler-Babb. They have this exciting scorer, potential superstar even in Lindell Wigington. They have a great big man. They have all these pieces, and they're nowhere to be found on like anyone's rankings. It's I think people put way too much weight on like the previous year, where Iowa State is being totally discounted when the year before, when they should have been discounted, they were seen as this potential tournament team. Stuff like that just drives me crazy. But I have Iowa State at number 28 nationally, so I'm very high on the Cyclones for this upcoming season.
Yeah, I have them at 29 nationally. They're right on the cusp of the top 25.
Yeah, I'll have them in probably the 25 to 35 range as well, and in the NCAA tournament, in that mid pack of the Big 12 that's going to be so hard to project. So I think that wraps up actually our team previews, if you will. let's go through our standings projections. We've kind of tossed our picks in throughout, but let's each of us go through. I can get us started here. I have number 1 Kansas. I think that's just no surprise there. West Virginia at 2. Touched on my reasoning for that earlier. Kansas State at 3. I think most people have those 3 as the top 3 in the conference. And then Texas at 4. Like I said, pretty high on Texas. Iowa State, TCU, Texas Tech at 7. I thought that 4 through 7 you could really just toss in a hat and mix it up. It could be tied again. We had a 4-way tie this year at 6. You could see it, or this past year at 6. You could see something similar this year. Baylor at 8, and then Oklahoma at 9. Oklahoma State at 10. I think the top 7 are definitely NCAA tournament teams. Baylor, I don't have in, but it wouldn't stun me. Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, I'd be pretty surprised.
Yep. So I can go through mine right now. I have Kansas at number 1, and then a big drop off from 4th nationally for Kansas to 17th nationally for Kansas State, who I have at number 2. And then I kind of extend that range of teams that you could just throw in a hat, where I think that 2 through 7 could be almost interchangeable. You know, a lot of people say that about the Big East this upcoming season, but I think the Big East is much more clear cut with a clear top and bottom and different tiers than the Big 12. So I have Kansas State. Then I have TCU at number 3, Texas at number 4, Iowa State at number 5, and West Virginia at number 6. All 4 of those teams are separated by 10 spots nationally, so from 20 to 30. And then I have Texas Tech at number 35. Those are my 7 bids. And then I have Baylor as kind of a mid NIT team, like a 3 or 4 seed in the NIT. Then Oklahoma State and Oklahoma kind of well out of it.
Yeah, I'm right with Brad. You know, I think 2 through 7 is a pretty big crapshoot. I have Kansas obviously first. I have Kansas State number 2. I have TCU at 3. Obviously, that's, you know, thinking with Jalen Fisher being healthy. I have West Virginia at 4. Texas Tech at 5, Iowa State at 6. I have Texas 7th. I think they could finish as high as, you know, 3rd or 4th if things break right. And Baylor 8, Oklahoma 9, and I have Oklahoma State finishing in the 10 spot.
Yeah, I mean, it all plays out the way we kind of said it would. Number 1 is very clear. 8 through 10, I think, pretty clear, and then 2 through 7, just an entire crapshoot. Who do we like for Player of the Year in this conference? I like Dedrick Lawson.
So do I.
Yeah, you know, I think that's a pretty good pick. I think now this might be a situation with Kansas where his numbers are dipped down a little bit because of so much talent they have. But I think I have to go with Lawson as well. I think Konate will be in the mix. And I think if Jalen Fisher is healthy and Lindell Wigington, those are the guys I would put in the mix for Player of the Year award. But I'd definitely go with Lawson as well.
Yep, so those 4 guys that you mentioned are 4 of my 5 people on the Big 12 first team, my 5th being Dean Wade.
Yeah, that's a good pick too.
I have Wigington, Grimes, Lawson, Wade, and Konate on my first team, leaving off Fisher just because of the injury concerns, but I would swap him in for Grimes if I knew that Fisher would have a healthy season.
Makes sense.
Is there any other topics that we wanted to touch on regarding the Big 12?
I think we've pretty much got it. I mean, we've kind of discussed the state of the league. We've discussed all the teams that we like and dislike. I mean, anything you wanted to touch on, Tony?
No, but I'll say this. I think this is the first time in a long time that there's quite a few question marks with this league. I think clearly the last couple of years, the ACC and the Big 12 have been the best conferences in college basketball. But I think this year, you know, with teams like, you know, West Virginia, Texas Tech, Kansas State, there's a decent chance, I'll say, that a lot of those teams could take a step back this year, and this league could maybe, you know, take a little bit of a dip. So that's what I'm interested in, to see how much of a dip this league takes possibly this year.
I think for me, the thing I just really think is so cool is to monitor how coaching hires shape a league and how good coaches just make a league. Like Kansas has a great coach, Bill Self. West Virginia, Hall of Famer, Bob Huggins. Kansas State, Bruce Weber, a very solid coach. I mean, I don't think he's an elite coach by any means, but he does a good job. Shaka Smart, a well-regarded name in the business. Steve Prohm, a very good coach. TCU has a has Jamie Dixon, who I think is tremendous. Chris Beard, an outstanding coach. Scott Drew, we've touched on this program about how well regarded we have him. And Lon Kruger, potential Hall of Famer, and Mike Boynton, the one guy who you still haven't necessarily proven, and he did a great job last season. So when college basketball can really be boiled down to a science of if you hire good coaches, eventually good things will happen, and the Big 12 is a great example of that.
Yeah, I think to Tony's point too about the Big 12 was always the past few seasons as either arguably or clearly the best league in college basketball. This year, I think it's between the SEC and the ACC, where I think both those teams, the top halves of each of those leagues are very, very good. And then I think the SEC's bottom is probably better than the ACC's bottom. So maybe the SEC could be the best team in college basketball, or be the best league in college basketball for the upcoming season.
Yeah, the level of coaching in the SEC is just ridiculous, and I think people are starting to catch on. And I think the SEC still kind of gets looked at as it's a football conference, but the SEC continues to get better and better and better. So I would not be shocked. I agree with Brad that the SEC could be maybe the best conference in college basketball this year outside of the ACC.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me one bit. I think those three, the ACC, the Big 12, and then the SEC will be the top three, and then rounding it out, Big 10 and Big East, I think are pretty comparable, and then the Pac-12 at 6 of the worst of the power conferences.
Agree 100%.
All right. Well, I think that wraps us up today, guys. First off, thanks so much to Tony for coming on the show and providing us with his insights. That certainly will happen again throughout the season, as he is one of our favorites in the college basketball Twitter world. Thanks so much for listening. Please shoot us a subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Give us a nice 5-star review if you enjoyed the content. We'll have more conference previews coming up throughout the next month or so. Hopefully about 2 a week, Brad, as we get going, and we'll keep you guys posted on Twitter as that comes out. Tomorrow morning, my conference previews start going on the website, cbbcentral.com. Every single day I'll preview a conference. So tomorrow we'll get it kicked off with the America East, and from there, it's a really exciting time. It's a lot of work for me, but I really enjoy it. I think it makes my coverage better throughout the season. So appreciate you all listening. Appreciate you all keep reading, following Tony on Twitter at College Hoop News, listening to his podcast, and he's got an ACC preview coming out over there. So definitely check his work out as well at the College Hoop News podcast. Brad doing great work over at Busting Brackets as always. So continue to support us as we head into the season. We really do appreciate your support. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great day.